So I think it's interesting that we're all gathered here today, and I hope the atmosphere is much less tense. And I hope people aren't like looking over their shoulders, trying to see who's ISD and who's not, etc. You know, I think we're sort of like moving on from that kind of a climate. And I think it's also very important to see this not as, oh, it's because Singapore has liberalized, or you know, some enlightened people out there have sort of enabled something like this to happen, but to see that we probably wouldn't have a gathering like this today if there had not been those prior attempts at staging those. So, you know, again, the history of civil society, the idea that if there was no pressure, then, you know, the people out there would not respond. So, and I think it's something that civil society, the kind of history that it needs to write for itself. Okay, a second point I would just like to make is this idea about why are we here, why are we having this discussion. The idea that this isn't, how does this issue affect the public? You know, at the end of the day, when you think of forums, you think, okay, it's a kind of discourse that's circulating among the elites, for example. It's an elite-driven kind of discussion. How does it involve the public at all? In fact, the rhetoric on the death penalty is that the public is being protected. Is that somehow the encroachments of this thing called the drug menace does not get to the doorstep precisely because of something like death penalty. But I think, you know, when we think of issues like not just the death penalty, but the Marxist conspiracy, etc., when we hear of things like national security, when we hear things about the public is being protected, and we hear of certain acts of state violence that is being committed, we need to ask, okay, this is being done in my name. The state is supposedly acting on behalf of my interests, and we have got to really think hard about, you know, whether these actions are actually justified. Yeah.
Initially, we only expected about 50 people to turn up, but I must say that the support today is extremely encouraging. It only goes to show that more and more people in Singapore are beginning to be interested in this topic and are opposed to the death penalty. Now, Yong Wei Kong, the person whom we are campaigning for today. How I got involved in this case, a couple of months ago, I was approached by this lawyer at the bar. She spoke to me about this case, which she said initially she was handling, but because she was not involved in death penalty or capital cases, the case was finally taken over by the state assigned counsel because the family couldn't afford, you know, it's quite expensive to engage private lawyers. By which time, when I met up with her, the case had already gone to the Court of Appeal, and currently as it stands, the case is already over. Now, there are only about, I guess, about 2 months before the President delivers his clemency, and of course the family knows and we know that we are fighting hopes against hopes, because hardly the President grants clemency. I'm not sure if he ever granted a clemency. But 400 cases had already gone to the President, and it is not the President at the end of the day who decides. If you look at the Constitution, it is the Attorney General who forms an opinion and she sends it to the Cabinet. And the Cabinet advises the President. That is why it's extremely important that we come together and express our concern about this case. Not only this case, but also the conduct of execution and death penalty in Singapore. When the judiciary is involved, it is the judicial position, and we are not involved in the process. The law is, the judges apply the law accordingly, and whatever that be the status, that is up to the judges to decide. But why is it that we have come together? What is our role here? Please do not underestimate your role in this process, because clemency is not just the President and the President alone. It is an executive decision. It is a decision made by the Cabinet on your behalf. So if we keep quiet, if we don't say anything, some of you who may disagree, then our silence may be taken as an acquiescence towards this execution. So what do? So when this lawyer approached me and she said, look, you know, I initially took up the case and I was not involved in this death penalty cases. I went to see him initially, and I got my partner involved. And look, he's only 19 years old when he was caught in 2007, and he looks like my son. I spoke to him for hours, and he's like so childish in his replies, and I kept on asking how he got involved, and he couldn't give any clear answers. It only shows how he got misguided in the process. I'm sure you would read from the campaign booklet that he comes from a broken family. His parents were divorced when he was 10, driven by poverty, until today his only wish is to see his mother. Unfortunately, the mother suffers from depression, and you can just expect how this message could be carried to his family. In fact, his brother, whom I approached subsequently, he is Yun Leong, who's at the back. He has come to witness this campaign. Could you just raise your hand? And that's Yun Leong, who is the elder brother of Yon Wei Kong. And his family has also come from Sabah. And so again, all of us are just hoping for the best, and of course, we are also prepared for the worst. So of course, we are here also to give the family the support as this execution is done on behalf of the people. Now, because this execution is done on behalf of the people, we have a right to say no to the death penalty. And how do we say no? One way is to support the petition that we have crafted here, and you can lend your signature as well as your IC number so that it will be taken with seriousness by the President. And secondly, we say no to the death penalty because we come here to withdraw our mandate to the state to continue with this state-sanctioned murder. So we have come to formally withdraw that mandate to the state. Now recently, the death penalty was, the debate had been described by the law minister as one which is emotional, and what can you expect? Definitely it is an emotional one. And he says that, well, this debate at the end of the day divides people, it creates deep chasms between campaigners for and against, and so on and so forth. And his conclusion is the debate ends in so much of bitterness. I have only one thing to say to the law minister. Here we are not talking about whether we are for or against the government or anything. It is about the issue which is the death penalty itself. My retort to the minister is that why is it so bitter that it is so difficult to swallow? This process is extremely difficult for us to swallow because the legal system in Singapore is highly flawed to carry out executions. And I will cite you some of these flaws in our system. Firstly, confession. In Singapore, just on confession alone, you go to police, you make a statement, and that's it. Based on your confession, your lack of knowledge of the law as well as the state's machinery which is there in the police station, you just make a statement and that's it. It applies to you and me. So without any supporting or what we call corroborated evidence, just your statement alone can convict you. Just like the case of Vignesh Murthy, when we were trying to say that he was convicted just based on the statement. And the statement was unsigned, it was not properly monitored, and there were a lot of questionable circumstances in which the statements were made. Unfortunately, the Chief Justice says on the eve of the execution, we can't reopen the case. I'm sure Alex, I would say that I've said this 100 times, but Alex, it's worth repeating 1,000 times. That the Chief Justice said even an innocent man can be hanged for procedural matters in Singapore. So brazen they can be. Why? Because you and I are keeping quiet. So we have to say something about and show outrage to this which is happening. Now, confessions also in other countries like in England and in China. In China, in fact, they have there are proposals for video recording of the statements, so that these statements, are administered properly and not under any pressure that you sign those statements. In England, of course, there's tape recording. In Singapore, it is still the 12th century procedure, which is recording statements. And the other unsatisfactory position here is that the statement that you give to the police, and when there is a trial process, when the trial commences,